Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. And we looked at his arguments regarding the city, or his view regarding the city of God, and he addressed the classic question of why does God need us? And his claim is that although God's wisdom and power and so forth is inherent to God, in order to have glory, to be basically worshipped, he needs us. Then the final bits for Leibniz, aside from the look at the problems and impacts, deal with the matter of the machinery of justice. Now, interesting enough, or not, Leibniz took the following view. One question is, if you have a system of justice in the universe, and one of the main arguments as to why God exists is to have just such a system. Good question is, how does that work? Now, one approach is, of course, to have God very actively involved, that he is sort of like the, sitting in the celestial courtroom, ruling every single case. Leibniz, though, is an interesting alternative. He believes that God has created the world and put within it what can be called the machinery of justice. And his claim is this, that sin, by the nature of sin and mechanical structure of things, he claims, brings about its own punishment. And likewise for virtue, mechanically brings about its own reward. So we can see the entire universe, according to Leibniz at least, as a justice machine. So for him, God is not to sit in the celestial courtroom ruling down sentences. Reality itself, the way God constructed it, ends up bringing about the appropriate punishments and rewards, or so he claims. Now, he does note, of course, that one thing we notice as we go through life is that good people don't always get rewarded, and bad people often seem to go unpunished. But he claims that, to try to answer this, that is, obviously the case, but he thinks that this should be the case, that it ought not to happen always immediately. Doesn't really argue as to why that's the case, but that's what he claims. But he does claim that eventually, even though the machinery of justice, the wheels may turn slowly, eventually he thinks it gets the result. So every sin is, in a sense, self-punishment. Every good deed, in a sense, is self-rewarding. Not because God does a ruling in every case, like an active judge, but because of the machinery of the universe. So it's kind of an intriguing view, the universe as justice machine. Before pressing on to his problems and impact, anything about this stuff that needs more stuff? So, some problems and impacts for a good dead friend, Leibniz. Now, he claimed famously that this is the best of all possible worlds. And again, his scenario is essentially, to use my analogy, that God is like, you can see him as playing kind of like an Xbox game or a computer game where he's picking the universe he's going to play. And since he's God, he knows like which is the best. And according to Leibniz, being all good, he'll pick the best. And being all powerful, he can make that occur. And so his claim is problem evil is not a problem because even though there are problems, this is still the best things could be. So God is off the hook because he's created the best universe that could be nothing better. Now, this led a French thinker, Voltaire, to write a criticism of Leibniz. And in 1755, the city of Lisbon in Portugal was devastated, annihilated by an earthquake. And this event, although big earthquakes are generally pretty important, this had a traumatic impact on Europe, not just because of all the people killed, but because it was a shock to the optimism of this time. Because the view was, as we'll see in a bit, that the universe is supposed to be orderly and benign, and the idea of the city just sort of being annihilated like that created a bit of a shock, not just physically destroying the buildings, but damaging the optimism. Now, this inspired Voltaire to write his classic work, Candide. And somewhat ironically, Voltaire is probably more famous than Leibniz among the general population. In the work, he does a satire of Leibniz, and he has the character of Pangloss, the philosopher. He's glossing over things, and his student Candide, traveling around. And what Pangloss does in all these cases is whenever there's something awful happening, he essentially says there is, uses Leibniz's line, there is sufficient reason for all of this suffering. And of course, the book doesn't end well for Pangloss or Candide. So one of his impacts was he got probably one of the most famous snarky, sarcastic responses in history written against him, which I guess is good. Second concern, freedom. Now, one of the eternal problems in philosophy, science, and religion is, freedom. How free are we? Now, of course, we have the concept of like political freedoms, legal freedoms, etc. And there's a notion of metaphysical freedom. And as we saw, we can kind of cast that as, is the universe deterministic, where everything, happens because it must happen that way and it couldn't be otherwise? Is there some degree of free will? Or is there some degree of randomness or chance? And of course, chance is not freedom. This is essentially, to use an example of like ordering a meal, this is you order the hamburger because that is what must be. Or if you believe in predestination, it is fated that you shall acquire the burger. With free choice, you get the menu and you can pick any option. Until you make the choice, it is not set. It could be the burger, it could be the burrito, it could be the burrito burger, it could be a turducken, or a squirrel-dillo, which is a squirrel jammed into an armadillo, which could be stuck into like a larger animal, possibly like an alligator, which is then jammed into a moose, which is then stuffed into a chicken. That would be horrible. Hopefully they're all dead when the process starts, because that would be even worse. And of course, randomness is basically, it's a dice for the universe. You have your chart, and then the universe rolls some dice, and you get whatever comes up, like burger or burrito. Now, as I saw Leibniz's view was essentially, this. I like to draw monads like this. Even though like nothing like that, there's like, excuse me. I guess the monads are trying to kill me. Damn you, monads. And so the idea again is you've got, your essence in there. It's preloaded into your solid state drive. And so every choice that you make, or alleged choice, every option, like picking that item is already in there. If you look at your script or your program, it would say on February 26th at 5:22 p.m. you select the burger. At 5:35 p.m. you consume the burger. At 5:37 p.m. you regret the burger, wishing you'd gotten the burrito. Now Leibniz says that you're free because, well, he contrasts free versus non-free. Non-free for him would be like being a puppet on a string. And so God would be, the puppet master controlling people. And he says that's not how it works. And the reason why it doesn't work like that for him is because the monads are windowless, and so they're constantly isolated. God creates them, and they kind of do their own thing. And so there's, the monad that is God. He creates all of the monads. They just go to monad their way through life, and then that's how it goes. And he says that's free because it's self-directed. You do what you do because you are what you are. And it's just like, Spinoza's view of freedom, that God is not controlled from the outside, and we're not controlled from the outside. Going with the analogy I used last time, it's like the difference between a remote-controlled car, where you're driving around, and an autonomous drone. You just program it, and it goes off and does some robot murder on its own. Now the concern is, of course, is that actually being free? And suppose this is true. Are you actually free? Well, we could use the analogy. Suppose we build, killer robot. Badly drawn killer robot. We gotta work on robot drawings. In its acts, of course, it's so broken because it's been killing so many people. Now, if we program Killbot and we let it loose, is Killbot free? We say, okay, we program it, kill all the people, and we close the lid, push the start button, run away, and it goes off on killing. Would we say that Killbot is free?
No.
Oh, why?
He's being controlled. He's already told what to do.
Yeah, we build Killbot to kill all the people, and we let Killbot loose. So we would say we're accountable for what, when they shut Killbot down, the UN, when the World Court has got us on trial, we could say, it is not us. We merely created Killbot and set it on the loose. It's all Killbot's fault. No, we'd say, well, we made Killbot, so it's us. And likewise, we're God's Killbots. He makes us. A lot of us go out and kill people, so he would be accountable. So we're not free. Now the problem then is working out what it actually is to be free, because we do talk about what it is to be free, and we say, it's ability to choose. And the question is, what would that actually be? How could we? Because if we choose based, because Leibniz is saying we choose based on what we are, and that's freedom. And if we don't choose on the basis of what we are, then how will we choose it? Is it random or not? So one of the problems of freedom is actually even describing it in a meaningful way. How does that actually work? Because if you're doing it on the basis of reasons or desires or feelings, that's what's doing the deciding. And if you're just doing it randomly, it's just random. So even sort of formulating what it is to be free is kind of a problem. So I guess we don't even know what we're asking for. It's like a kid, wants something, doesn't know what it is. Just keeps stuffing candy and stuff in there until it finds out. Or loses consciousness due to sugar coma. Also good. Now another problem for Leibniz is he really, 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 really wanted to not be Spinoza. It's kind of like, but politicians don't want to end up being just like some other bad politician. I'm not like that person. So why does he seem to collapse to Spinoza? Well, one thing is, of course, that saving determinism. If everything is what it is, so it does what it does, that seems to be just like Spinoza. Also, going back to God, similarly, God has to do what God does. He's operating the same constraints. There's God's, script, so God has to do what God's got to do. And so when he creates this world, Leibniz says, well, he has to pick the best one because he's good. He makes it so because he's all-powerful, and he knows which is best because he's all-knowing. And so it seems that you have the same determinism. But wait, it gets worse. Because it always gets worse. Now, sort of the defining thing about Spinoza is that the pantheism, it's all God, which is considered totally crazy and no one wants to be part of that. But secretly the people maybe kind of do. It's kind of like the KFC Double Down. You don't want to admit to ever eating it, but you probably kind of do. I've been intrigued by it, but not intrigued enough to die. So. But the idea of meat used as bread is appealing. So how does Spinoza become, or how does Leibniz become like Spinoza? Well, the scenario is basically this. On his view, you get all these monads, monading about. But each monad reflects all the other monads. So God has within him, knowledge and reflection of all the monads. And since he's God, his idea of each monad is perfect. So his idea of me is perfectly me. There's nothing missing from me. My idea of like other people, of course, is flawed, because I don't know everything about them, especially their terrible, terrible secrets. Maybe about their KFC, double, activities. And so my picture of any other person will be very flawed. But of course, God's picture of each of us is perfect. It's missing nothing. And so the argument goes, if God's idea of each of us is perfectly us, then God would seem to, in a way, our external existence would be superfluous. We're not needed to be out there. I mean, to use an analogy, if you have a server that has everything on it perfectly, you don't need the stuff like out in the wild, so to speak. And so there'd be no point for us existing out here, because we all already exist in God. Or in fact, even if we do exist out here, we also exist in God. So there'd be perfectly perfect duplicate of you in God, and you out here. So it'd be two of us, which would be kind of redundant. That'd be, well, except for some people. So I guess some people are so awesome, two would be even better. Or some people, even one is probably too many. One too many. So it seems he ends up collapsing into either the Death Star or Spinoza. Collapsing Spinoza bad, collapsing Death Star also bad, because it gets blown up. It gets blown up all the time. It never makes it. So what impact did Leibniz have? Well, one thing is, he dominated German philosophy for quite some time, until, of course, he was later replaced by other thinkers. So, one major impact. And of course, we still talk about him today. One sort of unfortunate thing is that, as mentioned before, many of his papers are simply after his death just stored in a library, and people didn't go look at them until centuries later. And it turned out that he had solved all kinds of problems in mathematics and logic, centuries before they were solved by other people. So if people had just gone and looked at, his stuff, a lot of problems would be solved. Now, of course, you might say, well, okay, at least there wasn't like a cure to cancer that, or like, immortality that was lying around. But it is an interesting point. I always kind of wonder how much stuff is out there that's just lost, sitting in somebody's attic that just may never be found. And probably the answer is probably a lot of stuff. Probably his greatest contribution, though, was the idea of a universal, logically perfect language that would model reality. And interestingly, just this weekend when I was at a 12K, which is kind of a weird distance, but it's a thing, just tradition, I guess. I was talking to someone who started doing a startup company that does weather prediction. And of course, accompanying a philosopher, I turned the conversation to Leibniz. And basically what the person is having a startup company, and the service he offers is essentially very tailored weather predictions. And what he's doing, what all weather predictions do that involve computer models, is the idea is to take the phenomena like weather, convert it down to computerizable units, quantifiable units, assemble algorithms that process it. So you put in data about what's going on, into the algorithms, and it gives you a prediction of weather for the next month or so. And of course, we think of it as kind of important, so we know whether to use an umbrella or not. And the answer in Florida is you always have an umbrella. I always carry sunglasses and an umbrella, because either it's got to be raining or sunny. That's Tallahassee. But it's very important for things like when to plant crops, when to, how the crops will go. And if you could predict the weather, you could actually do all kinds of interesting things like, play the stock market for, what prices are going to go up or are going to go down. And so incredibly useful. And essentially, this is all built on Leibniz's approach, where you model reality, computer-wise, and then you run, this language to get the results, the predictions. And so, thanks to Leibniz, we can do that we're working towards doing that kind of stuff. It also points towards, moving away from like weather prediction, things like artificial intelligence and other similar things involving computability. And so as Google tries to build the cars that will eventually become the killbots that kill us all, we can thank in part Leibniz. So the Google killbots show up at your door, you can say, thank you, Leibniz, you've killed us all. Okay, so that brings us to the end of Leibniz. Before segueing into the transition to part 3, the 3 inning, anything about part 2 or part dos? That needs more stuff. Yeah, because it's dos, but also dos. One is desktop operating system, and one is 2, but no connection. Okay, so we now segue into part 3. From a practical standpoint, part 3 stuff won't be on the test, but not on test 2, it'll be on test 3. Now the next folks we'll be looking at we'll be looking at 2 dead English guys, followed by looking at another dead German guy, and a dead Scottish guy, and then a dead German guy, whose family was Scottish. So lots of dead Scots and Germans here. That probably means something. Now, we looked so far, we began with Hobbes, who was English, and then we looked at Descartes, Continental, French, and Spinoza, Leibniz, and so Descartes, Leibniz, and Spinoza are all rationalists. And now we turn to the hardcore empiricists. But first, a little bit of Enlightenment. Now, the age of Enlightenment was the 18th century. The writers of the time, in a fit of modesty, named it themselves. They called themselves the Enlightened, because that's pretty modest. Now, their belief was very optimistic, that reason had shown the path of progress for science, philosophy, religion, politics, and the arts, and their dream was that passion, prejudice, authority, and dogma would be banished. So how did that work out? Do we live in a time with no prejudice, no irrational authority? Do we live in the utopia of perfect enlightenment? Oh, we have Facebook, so I guess there's that, and Tinder, so win. I guess Tinder's going on. What's the new thing now? Something is always like a new thing.
Talking about Pinterest, but
Yeah, that's old stuff.
yeah.
No, something's at it right now. Maybe Tumblr.
There's a new thing called Marco Polo.
Could be a thing. Maybe invest in it. You stand like in a pool and play it, or how does that work?
No, it's just like, it's like a live video, almost like Glide, but you can get more filters on it in a sense. I don't know why they call it Marco Polo. Had nothing to do with water at all.
Well, you gotta name it something.
True.
When you remember it, you know Marco Polo. It's like Facebook. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's not it has faces, I guess, sometimes, but it's not.
That book. People tell stories like it's one of them.
Yeah, I guess it could be. It's true. Good job. Now, the leading book of this time was Sir Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687. Also, John Locke's An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, and his works in Two Treatises on Government. And the end of it was Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. And so basically it went from about 1687 until the end in about 1784. And that was the end of Enlightenment. So what were the 4 pillars of this view, the defining characteristics? First, the idea that nature was orderly, benevolent, and ruled by laws. Now, that's one reason I mentioned the earthquake that wiped out Lisbon. And in a way, the earthquake thing, of course, was an exact, assault on that, because earthquakes seem to be chaotic, definitely not benevolent, and they seem random. Of course, today we'd say, well, earthquakes do follow laws, We're just not aware of the laws they follow. So are they right? Is nature orderly, benevolent, and ruled by laws? Is
Yes.
nature nice?
Yes.
How so?
Is it nice? I mean, look at the nice weather we have today. Like, I mean, it does what it can to be fair, but I think overall it's pretty nice. Like,
Yeah, we could say, nice, sunny day,
yeah,
got the trees,
right.
Squirrels.
Little wind blowing,
yeah, the
not too
birds,
hot, not too cold.
got the Zika virus, Ebola. Yeah, my thing has always been that nature is cruel but fair, but mostly cruel. Yeah, so we
Yes,
could,
depends on how you look at it.
yeah, and we could say there does have some benevolence, there are nice things, and also some bad things. Is nature orderly? Or is it chaos?
Mm. I guess it could be chaos, because like, you never know what we're gonna get sometimes. Like, 1 minute it's raining, 1 minute it's not, you know. Like the other day of the storm, and then the next like hour and a half later it's like ended. So,
Yeah, maybe there's some chaos going on, but it is pretty consistent though. It doesn't rain fire, and water doesn't cause things to ignite, and trees don't turn into squirrels, and squirrels don't turn into trees. So I'd say, yeah, it does seem to be orderly. Now, one interesting question is the last one. Is it actually run by laws? And there's been, as you might imagine, considerable debate in philosophy, religion, and science about that. On the religious view, of course, God lays down, God's laws. The universe is run by God. For those who are atheists, they might also believe in laws. And there's an interesting question of, are there really laws? And what would that mean? Is there like a rule book for the universe somehow that, there's behind it like this mathematics, like in a video game or engineering? Or, as some claim, there's not really laws, things just happen in a consistent way, and we make up the laws to try to capture what's going on. And it's kind of a subtle distinction. Namely, are there really laws out there the universe runs on, or are we just kind of projecting laws onto the universe? And depending on who you ask, some scientists, pretty much all scientists talk about the laws of nature, the laws of the universe, but there's a very important question of whether there really are such laws, or we just say there are regularities. This is how things have happened. And the important difference is this. If there really are such laws, and they're really laws for real, we expect them to always work. So if there really is like an ideal gas law for real, that's part of the mechanics of the universe, we expect that that's always going to be the case. It's how it works. But if we're just describing things and saying, here's a law of like how stuff works, that things could just change. I mean, I'll use this crappy example. Imagine there's a squirrel that like lives in the tree, and every morning exactly at 7 a.m. it comes out, forages, gets 2 acorns, and runs back up the tree. One question might be is that squirrel ruled by a law? So every day it will come down and do that. Or is it just it just happens to do that, and tomorrow it may do something else? Now, to make it a more serious question, take like gravity. Working right now, has always worked so far, but could gravity stop working?
no.
And we think, no, but how do we
You know that?
How do we know that? Is it like built in the universe, gravity? Is this, that's the way the universe is built. So if you're able to get into the code of the universe, you would see, gravity. Do not remove. Or is it just so happens it's been like the squirrel coming down the tree every day at 7 a.m. It just happens to be like that, and it might turn out tomorrow that gravity doesn't, it just so happened that it was working all this time, and then tomorrow it doesn't. Yeah, and so it makes a very important thing, like do things just work, just regularities that are just happen along, or is it really how things work? And in science, we try to find the things, try to find those laws.
Yeah.
And as we'll see when we talk about the various dead guys, there's a question of how do we know there's really a law there? Is it, a case of really finding the mechanics of the universe, or are we just saying okay, that's always happened, so yeah, it's going to happen tomorrow. So there was an assumption that nature is orderly and ruled by laws. Now there's also the view, going along with this, the same is true of us, that human nature is orderly, benevolent, and ruled by laws. Now, they were aware, of course, that people, did behave badly, but their hope was this. That if you took people and you properly educated them, as we'll see in a moment, that they would behave well, that reason would prevail. Now, they weren't about that. And this is a question about human nature. Are we orderly, benevolent, and also ruled by laws? So, are we orderly? Or are we creatures of chaos? Chaos.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes we just do stuff. Like,
I mean, yes, we're chaotic inside of order.
Yeah.
We're only go so far because we know we can get away with it and we can't.
Yeah, but we do also act, kind of orderly.
Right.
We could use Kanye West, for example. Is he still, how's he doing?
They're broke.
He's still broke? I guess crossing Taylor Swift was his fatal mistake. It took her a couple of years, but she brought him down. He paid for it. Now is he still asking for money, like on the Twitter?
I don't know.
Gave up? Too bad.
It wasn't any help. All his followers are people like us.
No money?
Right.
You can spare him $1, can't you? Maybe a quarter?
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we're kind of orderly, maybe not. Are we benevolent, though? Are we basically, nice? I mean, some philosophers, for example, Confucius, believed that people are basically decent. And people like Thomas Hobbes thought we're basically not. So given your experience with us, humans, are we basically decent, basically not decent, or is it just like all over the place, depending on who you're running into and whether they have their coffee? Yeah, it could be all over the place. Now, of course, they did have kind of a way out here because their claim was, if you could, as we'll see when we talk about education, that the troubles come from not human nature, but because of like corruption or damage of human nature. And if we had people able to be, properly natural, so to speak, that they would be well behaved. Now, not everyone bought that. Our good friend Tommy Hobbes thought we were pretty awful. His view of human nature is basically what was later done in Lord of the Flies, and that we're all selfish and awful. But there's also a view developed by thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and also put forth in some of the literature about the American wilderness during this time. If you ever read the Leatherstocking Tales, which sound like pornography, like 50 Shades of Grey type of deal, but not. The reference is not to leather stockings like that, but for people out in the woods wearing these leather things on the bottom of their pants to keep the burrs and stuff off of them. But it's like if you ever saw the Last of the Mohicans movie or read that story, that's kind of the genre. And the view in that is the notion of the noble savage. The people are basically good, and the city corrupts them. And so we have that as an idea of it. When it changed, when it was realized the noble savages were sitting on top of the noble gold and silver and land and oil, and then they went from being noble savages to just savages. So a noble savage is someone who's parked over something you don't want, and the savages are people who are parked over stuff you want. Now, he also believed, or the thinkers of this time also were very much in love with reason. This is also sometimes called the age of reason. And the idea was that even though they disagreed about, whether reason is empirical or a rationalist view, if you were to ask the thinkers of this time, do you have faith in reason? And they would say, yes. All humans are capable of reason. Reason is like super awesome. Now, is that true? Are all humans capable of reason?
Should be.
Yeah, I mean, at least at very, some basic level, they can know, like, don't stand in fire to figure it out, and hopefully,
Right.
eventually. Yeah, so if you set like a pretty low bar with what counts for reason, then sure. Where are people good at it?
You said, what are they good at?
Or are people good at reason?
No.
No, I mean, if you look at like, well, people objectively test for things like critical thinking, and people do, because one of the things is like, I'm co-chair of the General Education Assessment Committee, and critical thinking scores are always really bad. People are like, why is this bad? And I said, well, because everyone's bad at critical thinking. You know, it's not just it's students, it's, all you gotta do is like turn on the TV, and there it is. Now, can people's reason improve? I mean,
Yes.
there's a view that you could, kind of the optimistic view is you could take people who are basically rational and, you know, teach them to be rational. Which is a good question if that's doable. Aristotle, for example, claimed that by definition, humans are rational animals. That was his view. So, love of reason. Thirdly, education and experience. The view was that the way we develop reason is through education, and the way we bring forth that true nature of goodness, order, and benevolence is through education. That education is the solution to problems. Now, a couple practical impacts of this view are as follows. First, universities. Many of the universities in the United States, you know, that's when the United States was becoming the United States, they were created during the Enlightenment. And if you look at the, you know, a lot of the, you know, sort of mottos and purposes and missions of universities that arose during the time period, they're all very, you know, Enlightenment. You know, they focus on, you know, the value of reason, the benevolence of nature, the order of nature, you know, etc. Including, you know, Florida Agricultural Mechanical University, excellence with care, you know, heart, hand, etc. Yeah, so many of our great universities arose from this time period. Secondly, free public education. That's a very Jeffersonian ideal. The idea being that in order to have people, you know, fully develop their nature, public education is essential. So were they right about that? Is education a good thing?
Yes.
Why is it a good thing?
Because the more the more that you know, the better you can help society.
Yes. I always picture that, the more you know, Rainbow. Yeah, I mean, there's the pragmatic benefits. You know, we could say, you know, people, you know, generally people get like a college degree, etc. Income goes up, you know, crime goes down, social engagement goes up. And so there's all kinds of benefits to society from educating people. And then there are more tangible benefits, you know, better, people have more understanding, more tolerant, you know,
More patience.
yeah, probably more patience, know things. Yeah, and so there was a very positive view of public education. And our system of universal public education arose out of that ideal of the citizens of democracy should be educated and should not, you know, should not be something reserved for the elite or just those who could pay for it. Now, today politically, is this a point of debate, whether we should continue universal free public education? Or is that still simply accepted, broadly accepted?
I
It's
mean,
still a debate in terms of college education.
Yeah, the college level, because higher education traditionally has been non-free.
right.
But the idea was, you know, K through 12 was free, and then higher education was not. And now they're taking, interestingly, they're taking the arguments, you know, a lot of them from the Enlightenment, carrying them forward, saying, well, essentially today a college education is needed to be a citizen, etc. And those are Enlightenment arguments, to be better citizens. What's another argument people give today as to why we need free college education?
Because like, when you graduate, like, you're in so much debt, like you work to pay debt, basically, you're still behind on your actual bills. Like, what was the point of going for those 4 years and still nothing?
Yeah, yeah. There's a practical argument about debt. If it's so incredibly expensive, by having it be, you know, free for the student, that will help with that. And also, of course, jobs today require, a college degree. What used to require a high school degree now requires, for example, my grandfather, he managed IGA and high school degree. Because then you can get pretty good jobs. Actually, my grandparents, on my father's side, I think they got to 8th grade. My dad was the first person to finish high school in the family. First person to get a bachelor's degree, first one to get a master's, so I had to get a doctorate, because otherwise. Yeah, and if I have kids, I'll have to get like a postdoc or double doc or something. There's too much pressure from the kids though, so I don't have too much to expect of it. Yeah, so the idea of having education for the good of society, for the good of the individual, one that's still a popular one today. Of course, there's also an opposing viewpoint. There is an argument when they're defunding, public education, especially arguing against funding higher education. There is the argument that education is not a public good, that it's a private good. That when you get a degree, that only benefits you. And one of the sort of talking points is, why should, Bill, the plumber, and Jane, the, cashier, why should her tax dollars go to pay for Ashley to get her degree in anthropology? Why should their money be taken from them and given to someone who's going to get a useless degree? Which is an interesting point of debate. It's the idea that education is not a public good. It's simply a private good that just benefits the individual as opposed to the society. Now, the Enlightenment thinkers, people like Jefferson and so forth, believed that education was a public good, that people getting degrees was good for the individual, and the education was also good for society. Now, is that true? Is education just a private good? Is it just good so you can make some more money? Or is it public good?
I would say public, but you have to spend that money somewhere, like you're not just keeping it all, so the more revenue you make, the more likely you're willing to spend, which keeps the economy going.
True, you could make, a purely pragmatic, argument. If the public tax dollars pay for, it helps cover some of my education, and my salary is much higher than it would be if I didn't have that, and I pay back all those taxes, and I'm buying, I'm hiring, the plumber, able to pay the plumber and pay the cashier, then that's an investment. Putting money into education means better salaries, which means more money for everybody. So, pragmatic argument. Any other reasons that it could also be a public good? It's not just the monies. Well, it could also be another pragmatic argument. You may say, well, anthropologists, if Ashley gets her anthropology degree, studying something, but does having like doctors and lawyers and engineers and psychologists and psychiatrists and chemists, does that have any benefit to society? Yeah, because someone,
everybody needs all of it.
Yeah, you need doctors and you need all that stuff. So you could argue, education is a public good because we need people that do all that stuff. And so we pay in a little, the idea would be in order to get, people doing all that stuff. Now what about maybe more abstract arguments? Not just like, oh, I need a doctor or, the money thing. Are there arguments as to, say, civic involvement or an educated public or shared values or something?
Hiring the knowledge of, or increasing the knowledge of the general will prevent people from being, being taken advantage upon people who do have the higher knowledge, if they would do that.
Yeah, it does, having broad education does, if you go to the ideas of equality, that way there's not like, because one thing that happened in like Europe was education was reserved for the upper classes, and that meant the lower classes would always be a disadvantage. They wouldn't have the, the knowledge or the skills to compete. And so we could argue, having social equality does require having that education. And we can also use the argument from, involve informed citizenship, people being well educated to be good citizens. Now, are there any arguments against education, that we should see it just as a private good, and that we should not regard it as something that should be handled by the public? I mean, there is the argument, that I gave that, why should I pay for Ashley to get her degree in, comparative basket weaving or women's studies, or something like that. And we could argue that, for K through 12, we get the similar argument: why should my money be taken from me to pay for these other people? If I can afford school for my children, well and good. If someone else cannot, well, that's just a free lunch. They can't afford those services. They should have worked harder. And so you could make that argument, which should take us back to basically medieval Europe, which is a great place. Now, of course, to be fair, I'm biased, because I teach and stuff. But the idea of this, value of education was strongly developed during this time period. But we are seeing interesting pushback against public education, K through 12, and also a push forward, one of the political issues is over either free 2-year degrees, free 4-year degrees in public schools, or not. Of course, it's kind of like for you guys. So. Unless they make it retroactive. Maybe I'll get a fat check.
That'd be nice.
It would be nice. Now, there's also this notion of progress. Part of the optimism of this time was that there was a belief, not among everybody, there's always pessimists, but there was a belief that science and philosophy would eventually solve all problems, that there would be the possibility of achieving, the term utopia, literally meaning a place, but coming to mean like an ideal place, that there would be, progress. Things would just keep on improving. Now, were they right about that? Can science and reason solve all problems? Well, things always keep getting better towards the utopia.
No, don't we need good and bad?
Well, we need some evil. That's what the evil people say.
I mean, I'm not evil, but.
Yeah, he is. I don't judge.
But yeah, I don't think things are always just gonna always get better. Some things just happen when they happen.
Yeah. And of course, you might say there could be a limit, as far as as good as things can get. And also, the idea that things would just keep, improving, you might say would be, unrealistic, because you said things can happen. One thing that historically that put an end to this, not an end to this, but really damaged it, was World War I. Of course, they had, like wars and so forth. The Civil War, the Age of Enlightenment actually had a lot of, the American Revolution, etc. But when a way what kind of really did it in was World War I. When you had thousands of people being slaughtered in a single day by machine guns and poison gas, and people, you had an entire generation of Europeans and Americans who experienced that war, and that changed their view. And so the idea of a century of progress, that kind of died in the fields, in the trenches of Europe, under the tearing bullets of machine guns and the burning chlorine gas. What about today? Is there still optimism, or are we more cynical now? Yeah, one thing that used to be very popular was, utopian, you can look at fiction, utopian fiction. The idea of these, wonderful places. And, a lot of the, it's still, around science fiction, like, these great utopias. And then, of course, you saw the rise of dystopian fiction. Like, good examples today would be like The Walking Dead. The whole zombie thing is a rejection of this notion of progress that will just collapse into, well, for George Romero, the whole zombie thing was a criticism of consumer culture. He's the original, well, not the original, but one of the original zombie guys. And it was a criticism of our culture. Yeah, so maybe we don't have this view today. In fact, Hillary Clinton claims to be a progressive, but progressive is seen by some as a bad word. Because it's a view that we can always improve things, typically through government. And people who have the view that, the conservative view is the opposite, that if you're a progressive, you think things will be better tomorrow. You're making it better tomorrow, today. And if you're a conservative, your view is things were best yesterday, and things are only going to get worse. So, anti-progressive. Yeah, so the things in the Enlightenment still continue. Now, one of the big dogs of this time period was Newton, best known for inventing the Fig Newton, a cookie that the conception of which sounds really weird, but they're surprisingly delicious. Yeah, it's weird. It's like I'll eat one, and then it's like, oh, this is awful. Then I'm like, I can't stop eating it. I assume the secret ingredient is heroin or something. That is the Newton part. Newton himself was born in 1642, and one of his signature quotes is, "I have seen farther," is because I have stood on the shoulder of giants. He is one of the inventors of the infinitesimal calculus, which Leibniz supporters says Leibniz invented. Newtonian supporters say it was all Newton. So what was his main claim to fame? Well, in addition to his cooking, there was also developing a single comprehensive theory of physics. And what made it comprehensive was this. Using the math stuff, it enabled the derivation of Galileo's laws regarding falling objects, Kepler's law of planetary motion, and so it basically unified physics. And it remained the gold standard for physics until who came along? Who ruined it? Yeah, Einstein. Argue Einstein. Now, we still use Newtonian physics because it works just fine below the speed of light, and that's where we spend most of our time. Now, he was a hero of his time, a media celebrity. He had an authority on par with that which was awarded to Aristotle, and they even wrote poetry about him. Alexander Pope, the famous poet, said, nature's law of the hidden night. God said, the Newton be, and all was light. So I guess if Alexander Pope's writing stuff about you, I guess that's pretty cool. It also means you're really old because he's been dead a long time. So what was his science thing? Well, first thing was the tragic end of Aristotle's science, which some might say was about time because Aristotle was Aristotelizing, way back in the BC, so he had a pretty good run, but what would that be? Let's see. They made it to about 1600, writing about 500 BC. Yeah, a couple thousand years. That's pretty good run. So, what were some of the things they rejected about Aristotle? Well, one of the main things they rejected was this. Aristotle's view was there was the earth, and there were the heavens, and the idea was that there was a radical discontinuity between the heavens and the earth. The idea was the heavens are supposed to be fixed, unmovable, eternal, changeless. And there's different, Aristotle believed there's laws governing them, but they're different laws. So laws governing this, different laws governing that. Now this was also held in the Middle Ages religiously, because you've got literally heaven, and that's what we call it, heaven. And there was actually the popular view that heaven was up there, and hell is down there. But actually it's in New Jersey. It's true. I don't make up these things, I just report the facts. Yeah, so there's like a separate reality. Now, what ended up happening because of Galileo, and then with Newton, was the realization that up there, not the ceiling, but the stars, is just more of this. There's not like a separate reality, separate laws. And so one of the radical changes, but today, of course, it seems non-radical at all because it's just, you know, what we got in the sciences. But that rejection of that distinction, you know, on the plus side, it created, you know, a unified view of the universe. The universe works the same way everywhere. So all the sciencey stuff works all through, as far as you know, through all of space. On kind of the downside, I suppose, it did result in kind of a poetic and religious loss because there's not a, you know, a separate, you know, cool reality that's, you know, fantastic. It's just more, no matter where you go, things are basically the same. Which I guess is good for the sciencey thing, but in terms of adventure, it kind of takes the adventure out of it. Second thing, the empirical thing. Now, he did accept, obviously, you know, mathematics, which is deductive, and accepted the approach of thinkers like Galileo or Descartes. But he also embraced the inductive experimental approach of empiricists, like Bacon, you know, the ancestor of Kevin Bacon, best known for his invention of bacon, for which we will be eternally grateful. Thank you for inventing bacon. And he won the Nobel Prize for bacon, for inventing bacon. Only was given once, because there can only be one inventor of bacon. Once it's invented, that's it. And of course, Boyle, the inventor of boiling things, who also won the Nobel Prize for boiling. So, that's not true. It's Boyle, he's the ideal gas law guy. And this led to the development of what's known as British empiricism, and today, empirical science. So if you listen to scientists today, like, well, probably the most famous, you know, like Bill Nye, the science guy, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Stephen Hawking, and Donald Trump, they're embracing empirical science. The idea that you prove things, you know, empirically. And they typically point to Newton as their great hero. He also rejected what he called speculative theory. And he wanted scientists to avoid all that metaphysical speculation. You know, Descartes, we think of him today as a philosopher, but he thought of himself also as a scientist. Similarly with most of the other thinkers as well. But of course, Descartes get into all that metaphysical stuff. Now, Newton rejected what he called hypotheses. Now, that created a bit of confusion because we now, of course, use hypothesis scientifically, which is hypothesis is a claim put forward for further investigation. So he wasn't rejecting that. What he meant was this: whatever is not deduced from the phenomenon. In other words, metaphysical speculation. So here's were three very big changes. Change one. Going way back with Aristotle and Plato, and even like Leibniz and Spinoza, the idea was to find the essence of things. Like, what is the true nature or essence of a thing metaphysically? What are the underlying realities? Now, Newton says science doesn't do that. Science does not look for the essences or underlying realities. That's, put politely, beyond science, put less politely, a bunch of BS. So what is science supposed to do? Well, one of the radical changes that Newton brought about was this. Instead of trying to figure out, you know, as people like Plato and Aristotle tried to do, what is the true nature metaphysically of things, what they focused on was describing the patterns of phenomena. So instead of wondering about what is, you know, the essential nature of, like, human, or what is the essential nature of reality, the question basically is, how do things appear to be? What are the patterns? So essentially, we see the rise of empirical science, where you observe things and make note of the patterns, and then try to develop, you know, models for those. And so it's a radical shift from the old, you know, search for essences to observe, quantify, you know, codify. And we see this, obviously, this is science today. You know, this is the method where they go and, for example, if you're doing a study of psychology, you don't speculate what is the inner nature of the essence of humanity. You would have questionnaires and observations, and then build up a hypothesis, a thesis, and then try to develop some sort of explanation for the phenomenon. So, strict empiricism. And interestingly, this has fueled a battle between philosophers and scientists. For example, Neil deGrasse Tyson, more than wise I like, said some mean things about philosophy, which he should be ashamed of himself, because if there was no philosophy, there would be no science. He should know better. But he's, seems likable enough. So, Bill Nye, the science guy, actually recently came out against philosophy. And as much as I kind of like Bill Nye, as they say, I'm gonna go Taylor Swift to call. I need you to Swift these guys unless they come around. I need to Kanye West them. I won't do that. That'd be too often. Only Kanye West deserves being Kanye Wested. That's just good science. So we see the end of Aristotle's science. We see the rise of empiricism, which still dominates today. And we see the rejection of metaphysics, which still manifests today in people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye being mean to philosophy. So what impact did Newton have? So a good question would be is, why talk about Newton and philosophy? Well, here's why. Firstly, he laid out the Newtonian model, which later shaped philosophers such as John Locke and others. How so? Firstly is this. There was a belief that his method of experimental observation, looking for regular patterns, could be applied across the board. So, essentially, empirical philosophy. Secondly, there was a view that you could do ethics, politics, philosophy of mind, like you could do physics. In other words, you could, like in the first step, engage in empirical observation, develop the laws, and have a proper science of, say, politics, a political science, or a science of law, or a science of mind. The philosophers that followed his influence include our good dead friend John Locke, George Berkeley, no relation to the basketball player, or maybe there is, and David Hume. Now, one interesting example of this, a fellow would normally look at, but I guess worth noting, is a fellow named Julien Lemaitre. Born in 1709, died in 1751, still dead today. In 1747, he wrote a book called Man, the Machine. Now, the reason why it's important is because he presented way back then essentially what is largely accepted now, specifically this. Firstly, he argued that philosophers should stop doing what they've been doing and instead be like engineers who analyze the mind. And his work anticipated the modern theory that the brain works like a computer. And he understood, unlike many of the thinkers of the time, the implications of materialism, namely, or mechanism, namely that if you accept a mechanical universe, you end up with what's called determinism, as we saw. Because if we're, meat machines in a mathematical universe, then the logical thing is, if the laws of physics govern everything, and we're just physical objects in a physical system, then when you look at the equations of physics, they don't have something like, and here free will takes place, so we don't know what the hell's going to happen. That's not in there. Then everything would be deterministic. Secondly, there's what's called reductionism. Reductionism is a philosophical and scientific hypothesis that works like this. We saw it in Leibniz as well. To give the example that's not dealing with mind, Leibniz saw you could take all numbers and reduce them down to, you know, zeros and ones. And so people got thinking, well, maybe we can do that with everything. So here'd be an example of reductionism in the context of mind. One way to look at the mind is this. This is your mind. Things like beliefs, love, hate, thought. Those are irreducible in the sense they are the basics. You know, your thoughts, feelings, desires are just what they are, you know, in your mind. And the mind is, you know, a thing itself. Now, the reductionist view, put roughly, is this: that you could take, like, belief, or love, or hate, or the mind in general, and you could reduce it down to a simpler, more basic phenomenon. The usual approach is to engage in materialism. So you would say, for example, there's no irreducible metaphysical mind. What it reduces down to is, say, the brain, or particular states of the brain. So there is no separate, you know, mind, body. The mind, when we talk about the mind, that reduces down just to the body. There is no, well, since Valentine's Day was close by, do we have a notion of love as a thing? Yeah, it's supposed to be this special connection, a feeling, you know, a magical thing that involves buying lots of chocolate, cards, and guilt. Now, what would be a non-reduction account of love would be that love is a real thing. You know, it's kind of the hallmark Valentine's Day view of love. Love is or if you ever saw the movie Interstellar, that love is a force that transcends time and space. Now, a reductive view of love would be, well, no. Love is just, and I'll use the usual scientific view, love is basically, what we call love is a chemical process in the brain. You know, it's firing of certain neurons and certain chemicals that cause us to have a certain feeling or attraction to someone else, so that way we reproduce with them, producing more versions of us. And so the idea would be, if you give a neurochemical account of love, you're reducing love. You're saying love is not a thing, love is this. Love is a drug, literally. Or similarly for, you know, belief or thought. You know, we don't have, like, thoughts existing on their own. Thought is just, you know, firings of particular neurons. So reductionist accounts basically say we're getting rid of all, or in the case of, like, the mind, we're getting rid of, like, the idea of, like, love or the mind, and we talk about it in terms of the, you know, physiology, etc. And that's still kind of the thing we do today. So the idea was, to close today, is this became a model of the philosophy of mind. The idea being we'd have these basic particles. For example, as Newton saw space, badly drawn, not actual size, space is actually for Newton a thing. It's like a big box where we keep our stuff. And then inside space are all these things. And Newton, of course, embraced, you know, a particle physics. You know, bigger things like tables and chairs and rocks are made up of, you know, smaller things going eventually down to particles. Now, this led to modeling the mind on space. How so? Well, for people like Locke, the mind is like an empty box. An empty box formerly of chocolates, perhaps. And so the mind is empty. And then what happens is that through the senses, we have experiences, and then we get stuff in that empty box. Just like, you know, we have complex objects in space formed of simple particles. We have complex ideas formed of simple ideas. So essentially it's a model of the mind based on a model of space and objects. Now this does, of course, lead to a bit of a problem, one we've seen before, which is the problem of the external world. How do we know that what's in the space box, or in this case the mind, matches what's out there in space? So, space madness, and next time, more stuff.